On October 12, 1979, Amtrak Train 392 left Carbondale, Illinois to Chicago, Illinois. The train consisted of Amtrak GE P30CH number 715 and 5 new Superliner cars. The Illinois Central Gulf Freight Train number 51 consisted of 3 EMD G40 units. The first and third locomotives numbers are unknown, but we do know that the second locomotive was Illinois Central 3029. It pulled 40 freight cars along with a caboose at the end of the train. At 8:45 p.m. local time, ICG train number 51 stopped 20 feet in front of a crossover on track 3 due to a train ahead dealing with a crew change. The crew of train 51 was instructed to wait until Amtrak train 392 had passed after them, after which the train was to overtake the stopped train at track 3 before moving back to track 4. During this time, the lights of train 51 were switched off. The train director from nearby Kenningston telephoned the yardmaster to relay a set of instructions for moving trains 51 and 392 to a switch tender. The yardmaster proceeded to radio the switch tender, but because the switch tender complained that his connection was breaking up, he was telephoned and instructed to switch the crossovers for train 51 after a passenger train was to go past it, and also align a switch on track 6. The yardmaster did not remember if he said train 392 or passenger train, but he did not specify a locomotive's number or the track where it would operate. The switch tender went back to track 6 for a local transfer train, but as he was leaving for the crossover on track 4, he was called back by the conductor of that train to realign an improperly aligned switch. After correcting his mistake, he left the area back towards track 4. RTA commuter train 160 departed Homewood Station at 8:52 p.m. towards Chicago, and was noted by the switch tender arriving at 9 p.m. at the platforms of nearby Harvey Station. Assuming that this was the passenger train mentioned in the telephone communication, he was to proceed to the switch and unlock it. At the same time, Amtrak train 392 departed Homewood, Illinois on its last leg towards Union Station. The crew of the train reportedly heard the following transmission on the radio. After 392 goes by, let 51 down him, cross onto 4. Followed by, your radio's breaking up, I can't understand it. The Amtrak train accelerated to 65 miles per hour. By approaching Harvey, the engineer slowed the train down to 58 miles per hour. As the train passed under signal 2056, the brakes were still applied, despite the signal showing a proceed aspect. At this point, both the engineer and fireman saw the targets on the switch slow green, meaning continue to go on a straight path. Once the fireman shouted lined, the brakes were released, meaning that the train was to proceed as normally. The switch tender saw a headlight coming from the south and believed it was a slow-moving freight train. Unable to determine what track it was from, he proceeded to align the switch on track 4 to change the path of the oncoming train onto heading into a parked freight train. The crew of the Amtrak train did not see anyone on the ground, but the fireman reported seeing the switch targeted red just before the switch. He shouted a warning to the engineer, who applied the emergency brakes and blasted a long, continuous horn, which was heard by the switch tender. Realizing that a collision was imminent, he ran away from the switch. At the same time, the crew of 51 noticed the oncoming train and said twice, "Don't line the switch. You're gonna line them up on top of us." He attempted to reach for the radio and to tell the other engineer to stop, but it was too late. Two trains collided at 9:05 p.m. The impact was fatal for the crew of train 51. The first locomotive was pushed against the second locomotive, which mounted the first locomotive of the train, along with the Amtrak locomotive, completely destroying it, killing its crew members. Only the chassis of the first locomotive was left. This also resulted in the damage to the overhead line equipment, and the second locomotive received significant damage, whilst the rest of the train was intact. The Amtrak locomotive and first car overturned after they collided with ICG PG40 number 3029. The force of the impact being so great that the P30CH engine's mounts were torn off and the engine separated from the locomotive. Other damages included ruptured fuel tanks and crushed cabs in the fireman's position. The first Superliner coach was only moderately damaged, as one of the switch targets penetrated one of its walls 12 inches deep below an upper level window protruding 3 inches in one of the seats. The next 2 cars were the only slightly damaged and remained upright. The fourth car suffered no external damage, but most wood furnishings pulled loose from the snack bar from the anchor bolts collapsing inside the car. The last of the Shawnee stayed on the tracks undamaged. The ICG crew members' bodies were located not far from the debris of the accident. It is unknown if they made any efforts to leave the cab, but it's likely they did not, considering the lack of time that the engineer had tried to radio the engineer of the other train. The crew members of the Amtrak locomotive made no efforts to leave the engine room, and Fireman Murray sat on the floor at the time of the accident, facing forward with his feet against the front wall. His actions minimized his injuries, which would have been worse as the locomotive's cab was crushed inwards towards the seat. However, he still had a concussion and injuries to his cerebral spine. The engineer had no recollection from the moment of the accident, but it is likely he struck the radio controls during the impact and subsequent rollover of the locomotive, as the equipment was found damaged. His injuries include internal injuries, a possible concussion, a fractured hip, and right ears with hematolia. When initially interrogated, switcher tender Harris said that he knew he was doing a poor job on that day, but not only on the day of the crash, but also on other days. The day of the crash was also his second day working as a switch tender. The previous times he worked as a brakeman. Before this, investigators found out that a number of trains were missing from his logbook. The signals and braking systems on the Amtrak train was tested, and were operating correctly. The NTSB determined that the probable cause of the accident was the switcher tender's manual misalignment of the switch immediately in advance of a train, which caused train 392 to be directed into the crossover and collide with a standing freight train on the adjacent track. The misalignment was possible due to the lack of interlock or other positive means to prevent this movement. Contributing to the accident was a lack of training and limited experience of the employee assigned a switch tender, an inadequate communication system to give directions to the switch tender. After the report, the crossovers that connected tracks 3 and 4 were removed. The leading GP40 of the ICG and the P30CH of the Amtrak were scrapped, being damaged beyond repair. GP40 3029 of the ICG was repaired, but after another accident in 1984, it was cannibalized for spare parts. It has been 43 years since this incident, and let's hope nothing like this will ever happen again.